Today, though, it's time to go across to parenting and how to play good cop with your kids while setting appropriate boundaries. Nathan Wallis is a neuroscience educator and parenting coach, father and grandfather. He says that children and young people need to know there are boundaries, but that doesn't have to mean there is war at home. 2101 to get your questions in to Nathan, also 9 to noon at rnz.co.nz. Morena, Nathan, how are you?
Morena, I'm good, thanks, Susie. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Lovely to have you with us today to talk about this one, because boundaries is such a big deal, and how you actually enforce them and deal with that.
Yeah.
Why are boundaries so good for children?
Oh, children absolutely need boundaries. Like they're constantly looking for the edge of their world, and if we don't give them boundaries, they don't feel secure. You know, if they feel like I think if the child feels like you can't control me and I'm a child, how are you going to be able to control the rest of the world to protect me? So, it's just part of developmentally. Children are constantly looking for the boundaries so they know where the edge of their world is.
Which is why they enjoy testing them so much.
And it's why they need to test them. It's actually part of their job of being a child and being a teenager is to test those boundaries. It's all to do with, the development of self and becoming an adult. So they need to test them.
Are there, I guess it's immediately springing to mind is the toddler phase when children discover the great word no, and indeed teenage years. But are we always testing our boundaries?
Yeah, I think we are. Even as adults, we're testing our boundaries. We go to work and we test the boundaries on what we can do and what we can achieve. So I think it's just part of the natural human cognition is to be testing boundaries.
With boundaries, I guess, if you place, if you decide where it is, you draw the line.
Yeah.
Where are you on consequences versus punishments? I guess if you step over the boundary, there's got to be something that comes as a result.
It's a good question, Susie, because a lot of people, people that like punishment, I think you need punishment, often just take away the word punishment and replace it with the word consequences. But there is a real difference. Children absolutely need consequences, like that's part of that, finding where the boundary is. But they don't need punishment at all. Like the research is really, really clear that no amount of punishment is good. So not even a tiny little bit. Punishment just correlates with really negative outcomes. But I think the difference between punishment and consequences is prediction. It's that key word, prediction. People often ask me now, what is the latest stuff in neuroscience? And really the latest thing, everything's around that word prediction. It's around your brain's ability to predict. So it's the same. What that means is that if my child can predict what the consequence was going to be, then that's a consequence. If they couldn't predict it, it's a punishment. So, if my daughter gets in the car and I arrange to pick her up at 10 and she gets in at 10:15 and I go, right, that's it, you've lost your cell phone for 12 hours. That's a punishment because she had no way of knowing that was going to be the consequence. Whereas if I'd had a conversation beforehand and said, okay, there needs to be some sort of consequence. So, Dad's not waiting around forever. If you're more than 15 minutes late, the consequence needs to kick in. And I think you should lose your cell phone for 24 hours. She says, oh no, that's too severe. And we negotiate and get it down to 12 hours. So now the same thing happens. She gets into the car at 10:15. So I say, right, you've lost your cell phone for 12 hours. That's exactly the same outcome. But now it's a consequence because it was predictable for her. So it's really all about that word predictability. If they know it's going to happen, it's a consequence, and they need those consequences. But they don't need you to put them in like a dictator. When you sit down beforehand and go, well, there needs to be a consequence for this. What do you think it could be? And you negotiate that, you can stay being good cop, but at the same time putting in place clear boundaries. And kids will thank you for it in the long run.
Yeah, I was going to say, what is the problem, I guess, if you do go down the punishment route instead? What are you kind of setting your children up for?
Yeah, well, punishment, the first thing that comes to mind is it lowers the quality of your relationship. And I don't think that's why we become parents, in the first place. We didn't think, I want to have someone to punish. And you don't want a lower quality relationship. The whole idea, I think, of parenting is to enjoy it as much as possible, to have as high a quality relationship as possible. So, you could say multiple generations of kids got punished and it didn't do them a great harm. I get that all the time in conversations in the pub. Oh, my parents hit me, did me no harm. But what I always say to those people is I think the reason you turned out to be a good person is from the 99% of the time your parents were loving you and supporting you, not from the 1% of the time they were hitting you or punishing you. Those things you were able to endure and they didn't do a lot of harm because you were immersed in a loving, caring, relationship most of the time. So that's what stopped them from doing any great harm, but they weren't the things that did you good. If punishment did you good, then we would see very clearly in the literature that the more you were punished, the better you would be. And clearly, the patterns are the exact opposite to that. The more you punish, the worse your outcomes are.
Yeah, because I guess often you're in a position, I suppose, where you're ushering in things like shame, which can be very motivating, but not necessarily in a very positive way long term.
Yeah, I don't know. I think, I spent lots of years as a child therapist, and I think children are incredibly resilient and they recover from most things, but the two things that seem to be the hardest, that really leave a hole in their heart, that seem to be the hardest to heal, are sexual abuse and shame-based stuff. So I would say avoid shame altogether. I don't think it has any real role. We can talk about consequences and embarrassment, but I think shame is another whole thing that it's just, I don't think it's really a healthy part of our toolkit to have it all.
So I guess different people will draw the boundaries in different places, but the concept of it in and of itself is pretty important, I guess, not just in that parent-child relationship, but I mean, we do face boundaries in all sorts of parts of our lives.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when maybe if we look at some particular age groups on this, if a young child, if a preschooler is testing the boundaries and pushing the boundaries, what would be an appropriate kind of consequential situation set up for them?
Yeah, I think with toddlers, I mean, that's a large age frame, and they've got different levels of cognition as to whether they're actually going to understand the consequence. So I think with young children, you're always best to try and distract, or to, so when parents say to me, he keeps getting the remote and changing the channel all the time, what can the consequence be? I would say, well, if he's 2 years old, just put the remote up somewhere where he can't reach it, so you avoid that situation in the first place. Because 2 and 3 is a very difficult age for them to understand consequences. I think that's why we have that concept of the terrible twos, really, because you have to explain the consequence 1,000 times where they're 2 and 3 before they finally start to get it. So it's a frustrating period. If you don't explain it at all and don't try and put in consequences, then they're not going to understand it at 4 either. You've got to put in that apprenticeship which is really hard work to feel like you're getting nowhere and again explaining the consequence. So I think with young children, I would just, first of all, try and avoid the situation and wait until they're older before I have to do that. Then I would distract them into what they can do. So rather than saying, if the child's, I've used the example of pushing the buttons on the remote. I might find something else, like a remote that doesn't work for anything, because I'm thinking, okay, what does he want to do? He wants to push buttons. So I'd find something else and go, here you go, you can push the buttons on this as I take the remote away. It's much easier to accept, receiving something else. And you're still putting in a boundary. People might think that's soft, but actually he's still got the boundary in place that he wasn't allowed to play with the TV remote. It doesn't matter that you made it nice and easy by giving him the remote to the heat pump, and the heat pump's off, so it doesn't matter.
What about with, I guess, slightly older children, but before they're at the teenage years?
Yeah.
You're able to reason perhaps a bit better with children when they're a wee bit older.
Yeah. I still think it's a good idea to understand the thing about predictability, so to sit down and talk to the kids about what the boundaries are, because if they're included and they've got a voice in that, even if their opinion is a bit ridiculous, that's how children learn to be articulate. They have to get through that apprenticeship type years. So you have to let them have their say and talk it through, even though it's a bit stupid to you. But you have the conversation and you come up with an agreed set of what the boundaries are. Like I would say to my kids, like about bedtime. So you're allowed to question bedtime. You're allowed to come to me and say, look, that's not fair. All the other kids in my class go to bed later than I do. You're allowed to challenge bedtime at any time other than bedtime. When I say that's not the appropriate time to challenge it. So the boundary is, yes, you're allowed to discuss it, but not at this time. When Dad says it's bedtime at 8 o'clock, whatever the time is to going to bed, then you have to go to bed. Then that's not the time to question it.
Why is it a good idea to try to move the discussion to a point where it's not absolutely critical like that?
I think because I think about the brain structure, and the brain that understands consequences is the frontal cortex, and that takes a long time to develop. When that's fully developed, you've reached adulthood. But underneath that is the emotional brain. So the more of the emotional brain you're engaging, the less logical they're going to be, the more emotive they're going to be, the more easier upset they are. So at bedtime, and we start to discuss the bedtime, you're using much more of that emotional brain. Whereas if we do it after school, when bedtime's hours away, you're much more detached from the actual feeling of, I've got to go to bed. So it's easier to not engage that emotional brain and to engage that logical brain. Yeah.
Good advice. What about when you're dealing with teenagers and trying to set boundaries there? Is negotiation still the name of the game?
It is still the name of the game. I mean, teenagers have that extra, they've got a turbocharger added to their emotional brain. So it can be a bit more difficult with teenagers because they can be a bit antagonistic and they sort of want to live in that emotional brain. So they're going to try and trigger your emotional brain. So, I mean, not all the time. You have different temperaments, obviously. I mean, I think of my 3 biological children, there was only one that was like that just seemed to want to fight and to want to challenge things just for the sake of challenging them. So you do get different temperaments, but I think, it is the same for all of them. As long as they feel like they've got some voice in it, and you negotiate, then at least they feel some sense of ownership, that they feel like they've been heard. If they don't feel like they've been heard, they're just going to rebel back twice as much. So, I mean, like I say, it works for varying degrees. I had, one child where that just worked perfectly. As long as they had their voice in it and it was negotiated and we agreed on the terms, then they just followed those boundaries. It was like textbook, nice and easy. In fact, if I'd only had that kid, I would have thought, oh, what's the trouble with parenting? That's quite easy and straightforward. But then I had another one that was the opposite to that, like I say, just wanted to fight and wanted to make it difficult. And so there's going to be varying degrees of hardness in that. And but I still think for all of them that if they've got some say in what the boundary was and they help to formulate that boundary, then there's just way more chance that they're going to follow it. There's no perfect guarantees though, but just way more chance.
Yes, I guess you're always trying to stack up your chances so that you're likely to get it happen. And I guess some people do that perhaps with setting up a kind of good cop, bad cop situation. One that's, one parent who's going to hold the line more maybe, and one who's maybe going to be a bit more permissive. Is that a good idea?
Well, it's not so much a good idea or a bad idea. I think it's about context. I think that probably worked quite well for, my parents' generation, where you didn't see Dad much and he was just the authoritarian who went to work all the time and Mum was the at-home parent. And so it made sense for her to be sort of the soft cop or the good cop. And then, it did work. That, you wait till your father gets home, and he was the authoritarian. You were a bit scared of Dad. So, but that has several ramifications. One is, doesn't suggest a really close relationship with Dad when all he's seen is the authoritarian that you're scared of. It's a lower quality relationship. It also means that Mum gets less respect because she's not seen as being able to put in those boundaries herself. She has to rely on Dad to do it. I'm saying Mum and Dad because I'm assuming Mum's the good cop and Dad's the bad cop, but... Yeah, so, there can be negatives, but maybe in the short term, in one particular scenario, that you might choose to play that out and have a good cop, bad cop. So I don't think it's good or bad. It depends on the context of what you're doing. And but I'd just be wary of it because if you're always the bad cop, what is that saying about your relationship with your child? But if you're taking turns, then that's probably a different thing.
So I suppose if you are in a situation where you're being the good cop, what are some of the ways that you would make sure that the rules are still in place without that kind of authoritarian figure as well in the situation?
I think part of being the good cop is you want to paraphrase back what they're feeling, so they really understand that you're that's how you be the good cop, by going, so what you're feeling is this, and you see it this way, and when they really understand that you're understanding their point of view, they think you're totally on their side, then you're able to still gently point out the other side. Oh, but, I imagine Dad is seeing it this way and he's not, trying to do this, but he's seeing it from this perspective. They're more likely to see it from the other person's perspective when you're a good cop, if you've made it really, really clear that you fully understand it from their perspective. I think sometimes as parents we skip over that. We go, I know what you mean, and we go into the other side. We need to spend way more time on that. I know what you mean, by actually paraphrasing back. So what you're telling me is this, and that you think that happened in this way, and so it's made you feel this way. So they really understand that you're listening.
So I guess communication is the key here, as with so many things.
It is,
because I guess it sounds almost like you're saying it's not so much about what the boundary is or where you draw the line on that. It's about how it's enforced and how you communicate that to your children.
Absolutely, because parents are going to have all different sorts of boundaries. There isn't just one set, but people have different values, so they put the boundaries into different places. But what the kid's going to carry forward, then they're going to be able to manage their own internet time when they're an adult. They're going to, make their own decisions. So the boundaries aren't going to be what's carried forward. It's going to be how you put in place those boundaries and how the quality of the relationship when those boundaries are put in place. And the stuff that scaffolds those boundaries, that's what the kid's going to carry forward. And so it is, like you say, about communication. All good relationships require, good communication.
I guess it's one of those difficult things sometimes that these things can creep up on you as a parent, and you don't realise you're in the situation until it's right in front of you and it's happening, and you suddenly realise that, one of your parents essentially comes out of your mouth.
Yeah.
What are you saying?
Been there.
So
true.
These things do
so
change. Times change, and the way that we approach this stuff changes. I guess it is still possible if you start off down one route to course correct.
Absolutely it is. And I think it's worth remembering that all of the literature, all the research we have on parenting emphasises that our kids get all the best results from us when we are good enough parents. They literally use that term, good enough parents. That means you don't have to get it right every single time. You are going to be caught off guard sometimes, and you react from your own emotional brain. And like you say, you hear your mother's voice or your father's voice come sailing out of your mouth. I think the key thing there is to own that. I think in the literature we talk about rupture and repair. So ruptures, things go badly. And what we see, the pattern in the literature is rupture plus rupture plus rupture plus rupture equals negative outcomes. Rupture and repair equals resilient outcomes. That creates a resilient child. So if I've nutted out, my mother's voice comes sailing out of my mouth because I've just responded emotionally. I'm a human being. That happened a lot of the time. As long as I went back afterwards and went, oh, well, clearly I lost the plot then. That probably wasn't an appropriate response. I shouldn't be swearing at you. And then discuss it. I've apologised in some way. I've taken ownership of it. I've repaired that. And I've just admitted that I was wrong. It's not a weakness as a parent to admit you're wrong. It's actually really good modelling to the kids. If we want them to be able to admit they're wrong and repair their mistakes, then showing them us actively doing that is, the best way to teach that, modelling it.
Great stuff. Thank you very much for talking us through that. Nathan Wallis there, who is in our parenting segment today.